today. I just want to say a few words about Josh. In today's innovative world, the adoption of intellectual property policies and systems can be very critical in helping new ventures transform their innovation potential and creativity into market value and competitiveness. Also, the intellectual property rights allow innovative entrepreneurs to protect their inventions. We are honored to have with us a distinguished guest, Mr. Jonathan Kallmer, who will deliver a presentation on IP relating to innovation and entrepreneurship. Josh, as he's called, is ITI Senior Vice President for Global Policy, dealing with expanding market opportunities around the world for ITI's member companies. Before joining ITI, Josh was a counsel in Crowell & Mooring's International Trade and International Dispute Resolution Groups in Washington, D.C. There, he focused on helping companies use international trade and investment agreements and other policy tools to overcome regulatory and market access barriers in foreign markets. He assisted clients in advocating their interests on ongoing trade negotiations and in using existing agreements to open markets and protect their rights to free trade agreements, the World Trade Organization trading services, intellectual property rights, and customs and other things. Prior to this, Josh served as Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Investment, where he was responsible for developing and implementing U.S. international investment policy and negotiating with foreign governments to secure greater market access and better treatment for U.S. companies abroad. He co-chaired the U.S. BIT program, was a lead U.S. negotiator for several international investment agreements, and represented the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. He also played a central role in developing U.S. investment policy in relation to the EU, the Middle East, and North Africa. Previously, Josh was Assistant General Counsel at USTR, where he served as lead counsel for the U.S. in disputes before the WTO. Prior to joining the USTR, Josh was an associate in Washington, D.C. office of Hogan and Hudson, where he practiced in the areas of international litigation and arbitration and international trade. George speaks and writes frequently on international economic policy issues. He graduated with honors from Stanford and received his law degree cum laude from Georgetown. Josh, we're very happy to have you here.
Great, thank you, Andres. Really nice to be here. Thanks. So, I think I should start with, I don't know if this is a little bit of an admission or a little bit of an apology, but it may turn out that I actually get a lot more out of this discussion than you all do, because what you're all doing here is just fantastic. I mean, even in the 20 minutes we had before starting this, I had the opportunity to meet with a lot of you guys and just see how amazing the work is that you're doing here. As you could tell from my background, I have a background in international economic policy, trade policy, and those issues touch on innovation and they touch on intellectual property rights, but I haven't been deep into the innovation world until quite recently, until about 2 months ago. So I, as Andreas mentioned, I spent a good number of years involved with international trade negotiations, international investment negotiations, in general, trying to do things either in the U.S. government or in the private sector that would facilitate economic activity and increased economic integration, sometimes between the U.S. and the EU, sometimes with other countries. Some of that work had to do with intellectual property rights and innovation and technology. But it was only recently, just 2 months ago, that I joined the Information Technology Industry Council and have begun, still while focusing on policy issues, to be in the innovation and technology world full time. So I'm still on the learning curve, and that's why I say that I may lot more out of this than you do. But seriously, I don't have a big long presentation at the beginning. I was just going to identify a few issues that I have found in thinking about public policy related to innovation to be really important and timely. But then also hear from you and really have a discussion about the kinds of things you're dealing with. When you think about not just the projects that you're working on day to day, how you see the future, whether it's starting businesses or doing things internationally, thinking about the rules that are going to govern the work that you're doing in the innovation space. That's probably an area where we can learn a lot from each other. So ITI is a trade association, which is a collection of companies that tries to pursue certain policy objectives. In this case, it's a group of technology companies, the biggest technology companies in the world, so Google and Apple and IBM and Intel, every area of the industry from hardware, software, services, internet companies, and there's 60 of them, I think 61 of them. And what we do at ITI is essentially to try to find public policy issues that either all of our member companies or a great number of them agree on, and to try to encourage governments, including the US government and a lot of other governments, to enact policies that facilitate what our companies are trying to do, all in the name of innovation, all in the name of creating what we call an enabling policy environment. One of the big themes in everything that we do is intellectual property rights. And it is I haven't even been doing it until recently, but if you follow the news closely of the kinds of issues that technology companies are running into, a lot of them have to do with intellectual property rights. Some involve just last week actually, I spent most of the week dealing with an issue that had arisen in China. China has a draft policy that would require technology companies that are selling to financial institutions to turn over their source code to the government, right? It's a set of rules that's being enacted in the name of national security and cybersecurity, but the effects of it would be basically to require companies to give up the crown jewels of their business, so the very heart of what makes them special. So you have in that situation a case of intellectual property rights being extraordinarily important, something that we spent the better part of a week with a lot of sleepless nights trying to defend. On the other hand, in my experience, but again I'm going to want to hear people's thoughts on this, intellectual property rights don't always exclusively help innovation, right? I mean, if you follow some of the challenges that certain internet companies like Google and Yahoo and Facebook are having in Europe and other parts of the world, what you often see is a battle between essentially an information company like a Google and a company that produces content like a news service company or a financial wire company. And you have a real tension that is amazingly difficult to resolve between wanting to ensure that you protect the ideas that people are developing in order so that they can innovate, but not have those protections be so absolute that other companies that are innovating like a Google or another internet company are essentially prohibited from using some of the material that those companies create and incorporating them into their businesses. So there can be a tension in my experience between innovation and intellectual property rights, although there is also a very natural synergy. And for my day-to-day is a lot of times about finding the balance between those two things, even within a group of companies that don't always agree. So another one of our companies is Samsung. Samsung and Google and Samsung and Apple have been suing each other for a long time for various kinds of IPR related policies. And in certain ways they take opposing views about the role that IPR plays in innovation. So it can be very challenging. The public policy elements of innovation are not always straightforward, and it is the kind of thing that I can imagine you all having to grapple with. I think maybe I'll just stop kind of my initial remarks right there. I would love to either answer questions or sort of learn from you all. I mean, I have one kind of big question myself, and I asked Demetrius this at the outset, which was, why IPR? What was it in thinking about a possible presentation? Why was it IPR that was selected as sort of the core issue? What have been the experiences of people in this room relating to intellectual property rights? Maybe their experience is similar to mine, maybe they're different, but certainly there are a lot of elements to innovation that are critical, including IPR, but I was just sort of curious why IPR was the one that seemed to grab the headlines. So.
Perhaps I'll just make a comment, and then I'll give the floor to other people to essentially comment on it. I think IPR is very important for Cyprus because the efforts of the country at this point, after the unfortunately financial catastrophe that we had in March of 2013, essentially is creating a new landscape in the economy of the country, and the effort of the state, of the Republic of Cyprus. But then the understanding that the general public has is that we have to restructure the economy so that it's based more on the private sector. And of course, the private sector, is directly involved with IPR. And in Cyprus at this point, there is not really the culture of creating IPR that you have in the US or even in other competitive European countries. And it's very important for us to essentially provide this information and all the necessary things that are needed for people to understand what IPR is, how important it is for the economy, and of course the opportunity that companies should have once they create IPR. So I'll give since we have to coordinate this, will be if you have other comments on this, that'll be important.
When you we have disagreements in the United States, both within the United States and say in our trade negotiations with the EU, about what IPR includes. Do you have a clear sense here, either within Cyprus or within this room, about what's included? Is it?
Well, I mean, the important thing is to understand. I don't think I need that. Can you hear me, or yeah? The protection of IPR. I think it's big issues about the protection of IPR and what you can do or what you cannot do. Because I mean, once perhaps we should maybe you can say a few words about what IPR is for people to.
Yeah, I turned off the mic, so if you're having trouble hearing me, let me know and I'll turn it back on. I don't. We in the United States don't have a completely settled definition. Certainly in the international community, there's not. Patents are generally considered part of it.
Everybody knows what a patent is, right? Yeah.
Copyrights are generally considered part of it. Trademarks are. Trade secrets sometimes are, sometimes aren't. Are people familiar with geographical indications? Have you ever heard that term? It's actually a very thorny issue in the U.S.-EU trade negotiations. A geographical indication is an intellectual property right that goes along with a place. So champagne, the beverage champagne, the French region of Champagne and the French government takes the view that you can't call it champagne unless it's produced in the Champagne region according to certain criteria. And there have been lawsuits about this with a lot of, I think, California sparkling wine companies that want to label their champagne. Feta cheese, Parma ham, camembert cheese. And the US and the EU have just a fundamental disagreement about whether a geographical indication should be considered IPR. The example I was thinking of just a few minutes ago in sort of our world and certainly my world, I sort of referenced it in talking about Google and then talking about a news content company. There's actually, I may get some of the details wrong, but there is I think a draft measure I think it's a member state measure in Spain that would basically say that if the Google News Service or any internet company's news service carries a news story, say from Reuters, publishes a news story, or maybe it's not even from an established company, maybe it's just a blog. Say a page from a blog is viewed through Google, and that page actually contains a statement or something that is a copyright violation. Say there's a YouTube video of somebody singing a song and they haven't paid to be able to sing it. Copyright violation. The government of Spain would hold Google liable for that copyright violation. It's called intermediary liability. And so you can only imagine if that were actually the rule and an internet company were on the hook from a copyright perspective from every possible piece of infringing content that were just on its platform. The whole idea of Google's business, a large part of it, is to be a platform. That's its IPR, right? I mean, the intellectual property that makes up at least part of the core of Google's business is this distribution function. So in a very real way, you have the battle of two sets of IPR. And they're battling each other directly. That's sort of how the issue is being thought of in the United States. And not everybody sides with Google, by the way. Plenty of people are against it. But it's that kind of example that kind of illustrates to me basically every day these days that these ideas aren't always as clear cut as they seem. And so, take Cyprus, for example. One of the things I kind of keep referring to this US-EU trade negotiation because it's the primary reason I made this trip. And one of the themes we've been talking about this week is the potential of this agreement to really help small and medium-sized enterprises, of which there are many in Cyprus and potentially many more, to prosper. So the big companies can kind of deal with trade barriers and so forth, but smaller companies cannot. And so if you can reduce trade barriers for small companies, you can really give them chances to succeed. So sort of a starting point is hopefully that will happen and SMEs will have even greater chances to succeed here. A big theme of what we've been doing this week on this larger trade negotiation topic, because the whole idea behind one of these negotiations is to kind of reduce barriers, reduce kind of the regulatory hassles that make it more expensive to operate in another market, and to kind of make our relationship more like a single market, even though it will never be truly a single market. Part of that is doing things to improve the investment environment, not just in Cyprus, but in France and the United States and everybody that's involved. And that to me is a big opportunity for Cyprus. In fact, I've been telling people this week, met with some government people and some business people, and I've basically been saying, just because you're a small country doesn't mean you can't affect this thing in a way that helps Cyprus. You need to get people to Brussels, and you really need to focus on this, and there are certain parts of the agreement. It's very technical, and it takes time to understand the specific parts of it. But a lot of the agreement has to do with improving investment climates and creating conditions for our companies to invest in each other. So absolutely, I mean, it's things like doing trade agreements, but it's also things like improving, and I'm not sure, I don't think this is a huge problem with Cyprus, I'm just saying generally, like improving the transparency of regulation, making sure, the tax system is competitive, making sure that there are incentives to invest, making sure that companies in different sectors and other markets are aware of all the talent that's here. And so I think absolutely, I'd be really positive about it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
We're seeing a battle between the European Union and the US. The US is going more for regulation, or the EU is going for more regulation. Can you elaborate more?
Yeah, actually neither really, although the story is, I think that the US is going to sort of require Europe to give up its strong social model and regulatory protections. And one of the main examples that gets cited is genetically modified organisms in food. You'll start seeing this in the headlines probably if you haven't already, but it's not like the agreement is actually not about standards of regulatory protection. It's just about reducing waste and duplication, so you don't have to, like if you're a pharmaceutical company, you don't have to do a full test in both the US and the EU of your drug to get it approved. Maybe you do the test in the EU, and if it gets approved there, you get the certificate and you take it to the US Food and Drug Administration to get approval. So that's sort of what's at play, but it's been sort of made into this this belief that it's actually going to require regulatory protection to come down, so like workers' rights and consumer protection and public health, but that's actually not at play.
What about foreign exchange here?
What about what exchange?
Foreign exchange.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think it's at issue, the agreement.
So you're saying that something approved in Europe, it's very easily to be approved also in US. But I think it's not the vice versa.
That's what?
But it's not valid the vice versa.
I think in most areas it's hard right now to do it. I mean, it should be a lot simpler than it is, whether it's like a drug or a chemical or an automotive product. Yeah. So that's what they're working on in the negotiation is to say, look, you have this test, we have this test. We're basically testing the same thing. Safety, making sure it's safe and making sure it works. So let's find ways to kind of get closer to one test so companies don't have to pay twice and have all these delays before they get their products to market.
But this trial have to be done once, right?
It's unclear. I mean, I think the idea would be to make it as easy as possible, so you just do one and get approval for one, and then you could go get approval
This is
for
a later
another.
perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. This
I'd like
great.
to thank Josh for coming here and doing it tonight. We hope to have you again here very soon.
Thank you. I'd love to
And
come
enjoy
back.
the rest of your visiting here in
Thanks.
Cyprus.
Appreciate it. I have about 6 hours remaining. I have to go to the airport at 1
But
a.m.
if you want to, talk to Josh for a few minutes after, I mean, we'll be here for a
Great.
few
Yeah, we'll
minutes.
hang out.
Okay.
Sounds like Cyprus is, I think, fortunately, beginning to have, because there is I mean, I can tell from just 3 days of being here, there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit here. Is sort of this tension between wanting to be able to produce something that is innovative and creative and effective and do it on sort of at least initially a small scale, because that's the nature of the market, and wanting to make sure those ideas are protected, but also wanting to make sure that the environment in which people are doing it is not so protective of other ideas that it forecloses opportunities. Does that make sense? So, you can imagine a Cypriot internet company being started. You want, obviously, the IPR associated with that internet company to be protected, so that there's an incentive to innovate. But it could be that, just like Google, part of the business of that internet company is to distribute or otherwise deal with information that could present, say, this copyright problem that I just described, or something else that could in some other way challenge some other person's intellectual property. So it's I think it could be a challenging environment.
Because there are many Cypriot companies that are trying to develop IPR. And of course, there's the question of which is the best way to, once you have an idea for a patent, where to, to essentially protect that. Should you do it in the European patent office? Should you do it with USPTO, the US patent trademark organization, or should you do it somewhere else? And we have a case here. One of our faculty members that is actually collaborating with the City University of New York, and they have we have a patent with them, and that we are trying to see how to proceed with protecting our patent, and how we can go ahead and generate revenue from our IPR. So perhaps Vasilis can say a few things about that.
Thank you, Andres. Actually, that's the case. We actually had a granted PCT, and now the question is, it's one thing to actually obtain the PC or whatever. How do you exploit that? I mean, let's say that the university is not well established or whatever, to have a tech transfer unit or to guide you through the possibilities. What is the best way to pursue you exploiting this technology and trying to sell it on to an industry company and so on? Because getting the patent is one thing. Putting it to use, it's completely different. So what would you actually advise people towards that goal?
Give me an example. Is there a specific example of a product or a service for which this issue has come up?
Well, it is a specific
to the extent you can share it, to the extent you feel comfortable.
Well, it is published. I mean, it's public now, so it's we can share it, because it is public. So it is effectively a utility patent. It's not a patented compound per se. It's basically involving a compound that was developed in the States, as Andreas mentioned, in the CUNY, that is patented towards medical use, but now it's a utility patent towards its use to plants. For a different thing altogether. So, of course, a good target would be biotech companies, biotech, and so on. But still, how does it work? Do you actually walk around, knocking on doors or emailing generic Monsanto, Syngenta, Agri, Dow, whatever? It doesn't work like that, I guess. So, how would you?
So you're asking about putting aside the legal issue. Assume you've kind of gotten over the legal hurdles. You've got the patent. You've got the thing you need.
It's published.
It's published. What are the mechanics of actually commercializing it or having an opportunity?
Exactly.
I mean, I think there are. I say this as someone who's never done this, so give it that amount of weight. I think there are sort of two answers to that question. One is, I'm trying to think of the best order to do this. The first is to have an overall sort of innovation technology environment that creates the fewest number of sort of barriers to actually making the business connections you need to make. And actually this whole internet intermediary copyright liability example I think is relevant, because you can imagine that having a patent and trying to undertake a business activity related to high value IPR can be a sensitive area. You want to make sure that to the extent you're in Cyprus interacting through the internet with people in other jurisdictions, that you're doing it in a way that does not create risks of you potentially infringing other people's IPR. That's one answer. I think the other answer is much more mundane in a way and just involves kind of what we call shoe leather work to make the business connections. Doing whatever can be done to make those connections with the Monsantos or the Genzyme or whoever it may be. I don't think that from the business point of view there is a single recipe that either needs to be followed or has shown itself to be the most successful. My experience with actual business is not extensive, so I just don't know. But I have not seen any single surefire way of doing that. I will say this, and I thought about this kind of before coming here today, and then after just again spending 20 minutes with you guys beforehand, thought I would love for our member companies to meet you guys and to kind of establish relationships with what you're doing, because I think they're big companies now, but they know that they can't rest on their laurels and just think that they're going to keep innovating with what they've got. They're constantly wanting to establish new connections and access new markets and access talent and so forth. And so I hadn't even anticipated. I'm here on a State Department trip. I'm not here in my job capacity, but I can now, and this is part of the reason I said I may benefit from this a lot more than you guys. But I would very much like to contribute to those connections just as a result of meeting you all.
Is it like a think, not the think tank, sorry, is it like a generic tech transfer service in the US, where you can approach them and they can kind of...
This is what Vasilis is saying right now is what I have mentioned to you, before the presentation. Unfortunately, Cyprus does not really have the infrastructure, the IP infrastructure, to provide help to all these great companies, ideas that come out of universities that require IP protection. So they're in the process of establishing a national innovation and technology transfer office that is going to service the universities and perhaps the private sector, where they're going to have all this expertise that you have mentioned, lawyers, business experts, people that are going to bring you in touch and help you to identify potential people, potential companies, organizations that would be interested in licensing your patent. Unfortunately, we have this limitation in Cyprus, and that's what we have to really work on to develop this office, so that we will be able to help people like you, because there are many people within the university, within the private sector that need that help, and also help them find venture capitalists that will be interested in investing further into your ideas. I'm sure there'll be other people. Our friend here may be able to provide some points on this. Please.
It's Marinos Kleanthis.
Marinos,
I'm an IP attorney, represent IP Cyprus, which is a law firm specialized in intellectual property rights in Cyprus. Let me first say that it's a great opportunity having you here and having your thoughts about intellectual property rights, and I would like also to congratulate the university and of course the American Embassy for this great opportunity. Because unfortunately, I would say that there is a lack of information in Cyprus for any issue regarding intellectual property rights, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Of course, during the last 2 or 3 years, mainly because of the economic crisis, I would say that more and more people are related and are involved in new ideas, in producing new products or new services. So this might be one of the few good things of the economic crisis. Cyprus, of course, offers full protection of intellectual property rights. As a member of the EU, and during the last 10 years, of course, we implement fully the EU legislation. So let's say that there is a myth between the Cypriot citizens. They believe that, okay, I don't pay attention to my IP rights because anyway the legislation provides no protection. No, this is a myth. Cyprus offers fully and protection of any IP issues. So there is this infrastructure of intellectual property rights. The problem is the culture of the population, that they, until today, even the universities, also today, they don't pay attention to the issues, or they don't pay as much attention as they had to for the intellectual property rights. I heard the question of Vasilis about what is the next day after the protection of a patent. Let me say that from my experience during the last 7 years, the second myth, or one of the myths of each innovator, is that the end of the road of innovation is when they have the protection of their rights. No, this is not the end.
That's the beginning.
It is just the beginning. Not all patents, not all the granted patents are the best, the products or the best services in the world. So also the timing is very important, branding is very important, marketing is very important. So that is why the entrepreneur or any innovator must have in mind that it's not only how they will protect the expression of their business ideas, but it's how they are going to brand them, how they are going to use them. And lastly, let me also say that Cyprus can be the hub, the innovation hub of Europe. I truly believe that, not only because of the legislation, but also let's not forget that we provide the best tax regime of intellectual property rights in Europe. Cyprus offers 80% tax exception on any income generated by intellectual property rights. So I truly believe that, for example, Google, Facebook, instead of using other jurisdictions in Europe, I truly believe that they can use Cyprus as the basis of their intellectual property rights, and I'm very excited for that. Let me say that until recently, the lawyers, they used just to sell companies and that's it. They just used to sell McDonald's in the foreign investors and that's it. No. Now, because of the tax regulations of intellectual property rights in Cyprus, and because of the fully protectable environment of intellectual property rights in Cyprus, we have the opportunity to produce new products, to produce new business ideas, not only general services of companies, registration, etc. So yes, from our side, we are excited for this new culture. We live the revolution of innovation in Cyprus, and it's very important having you here and to see how Cyprus, as a member of the EU, can strengthen the cooperation with the United States and the community of Silicon Valley, basically.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I should first say I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm happy to try to find out.
Please.
Because I'm now working with a strong entrepreneurial spirit here, and this woman kind of looked at me. She's like, "Why would you think that?" Basically suggesting it's not true, and I just I didn't have a great answer. But then, like 5 minutes later, literally the 3 people I'd been talking to were all discussing their own business ideas, and one was technology related, one I think was kind of more biopharmaceutical, so close, and one wasn't even in what we kind of now use the term innovation as a shorthand for, and it just, it was very revealing in a way, and I think kind of afterwards this woman was like, yeah, I guess, we have some ideas. I suppose another thing about intellectual property is that, and innovation, is that it doesn't need to just be about technology in kind of the Silicon Valley way we think about it. That's obviously a big part of it, but just the idea of using originally generated ideas to build businesses and make money and do amazing things. You can have that in a lot of different sectors, and I think that's why, in a way, we see this tension in the public policy arena is because the original ideas generated in one business can sort of interact in an opposing way with the original ideas generated in another. So, but I mean, what do people, obviously this is sort of a biased group because you're all here, but what are your feelings about the entrepreneurial opportunities here? I mean, obviously we have this, you know, very important idea about needing to know how to commercialize and needing to know how to make those connections, but just from the perspective of the sheer kind of interest and talent and will to generate those ideas, do you see it kind of broadly characterizing Cypriots, or does it seem more narrowly focused?
Questions right here.
Yeah, sure.
I can ask him his questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
You
ahead.
can answer it? Okay.
Yes, because I'm one of the, my name is Marius Pereira, I'm one of the founders of the first news portal about entrepreneurship,
Huh.
disruption and innovation in recent Cyprus. And actually, yeah, the last, this was narrowly done the last 3 years, but now it's going mainstream and it's changing, especially with the crisis. The crisis actually helped to the young people to start thinking, instead of start thinking that they were going to work in the government when they leave the college. Now they started thinking that they will have to create their new startup, their new business, their new company. So we have plenty of initiatives around. We have Cell, we have Startup Cyprus, we have other also initiatives that we are running. But my question is, because as a news portal, we will have to project all these startups with their intellectual properties, etc. I want your advice, maybe Marinos, and regarding how a news portal will deal, will project, for example, all these startups to outside to the local community, and how, I mean, we run, as a news portal, we run some risks about this. I understand this because also my background, I was doing marketing for a Ukrainian-based company that was dealing with IPR results, but in a global scale. So I want your feedback as a news portal, what dangers we have with this. For example, consider that we have the Cyprus Google News that will cover all the news, all the...
I think absolutely. I mean, you're a great example, like a real example here of this same dynamic. Other people's intellectual property, if the protection for it is absolute, may be inconsistent with your intellectual property, which is collecting and disseminating information, right? I mean, you can't, I couldn't imagine that if your business had liability for any content that came through the news portal that infringed a copyright or infringed a trademark, that you could afford to be in business. How could you run that risk? So that strikes me as a very significant thing to keep in mind, and a very good, it's one thing for Google to say it. I mean, they're Google and they're big, and a lot of people don't like them anyway, but when it's a small business, it could be your livelihood, and it can be it's the crown jewel of your business. I think there are some other considerations that maybe aren't as directly related to IPR, but that are very much related to technology that a lot of you may face. One of them is privacy and data protection, and not so much because it might be infringing an intellectual property right, but because you as a news portal may be in the position of collecting and distributing personal information that is protected by privacy laws? What happens if you, as an intermediary, have liability for any breach of a privacy law that happens as a result of that? That's also a huge risk, and that's one of the. I thought of that, I think, because that's one of the big issues we deal with is balancing the need to be able to use people's information, which is sort of at the heart of much of electronic commerce, with the valid need to protect privacy. So you need to make sure in all these areas, whether it's IPR or privacy, or I can think of other examples, that you're kind of striking the balance in the right place. You're rewarding innovation. You're protecting people's IPR, privacy, but you're not doing either of those two things so absolutely that you're kind of hurting the other interest, if that makes sense.
Is there anybody else here that is creating a company that is in the process of developing IP, or that may have any other questions?
And actually, I had a question too. I mean, to what extent do you guys, after you're done studying, would you prefer to do something sort of small and risky and that's your own, or would more of the ideal be to go work for an established company, regardless of whether it's Cypriot or you're somewhere else in Europe or whatever? What is sort of the appetite for risk that you guys have?
I think
thinking about
this is the I think the point that the gentleman in the back mentioned before. There is the need right now, after the financial crisis, the culture, the general culture that we had here in Cyprus and many European countries, that you graduate from the university and then you get a job in a bank, or you get a job in the government, or you get something very secure. So that mentality of adventurism and of trying to do something risky, starting your own company and using some of your own savings as an investment, is not something that is very common here, and it's hard for people to understand. But in the U.S., like the students, the undergraduate students who graduate from college, they are very willing, to go in, and risk and start their own company, and of course, there is a lot of punishment to that. I mean, it's not easy. But I mean, my point is that I think that there is a different mentality, and that's what we're trying to change right now, as the gentleman mentioned in the back. And plus the fact that we have the law that essentially, from what you have mentioned, the law of Cyprus essentially protects patents. I mean, if you develop a patent, whether it's a USPTO or a European patent office,
of course.
Yeah.
You can validate in Cyprus.
So we have a good environment to do that, but we have to really change the culture of the people to be able to get them to start their own companies. But that's my own opinion. Maybe, I want the audience to get involved and say your own opinion about what's happening in Cyprus.
The startup scene is changing. It's shifting towards young people are trying to, but it's getting its pace, and new. We're looking how to bring incubators in Cyprus, how to grow the startup scene in Cyprus, and there are some signs that are very positive.
Yeah, well, and another point I was going to make is that that for every story about somebody starting a company in their garage in Menlo Park, California or something, there's like 1,000 people who went to law school and played it safe, and so there's kind of a myth, I think, on how risk-taking in entrepreneurial United States is.
So I may be wrong.
But it's certainly true. Like, even if you are risk-loving, you have to at least have a little bit of a cushion to kind of fail, and because that's just gonna happen. I was going to make another point, but now I've sort of lost my train of thought, so maybe I'll just punt it back to you guys.
One more thing is it's hard to find venture capital or people who are willing to take risks.
I remember
I mean,
what I was
to
gonna say.
give money to help you to do your own business.
Yeah, go ahead.
Something. But private sector itself, isn't it risky? I mean, when you are employed in a company, in a way you have to sell yourself in order to stay there, in order to make an impression, to gain the position,
Yeah.
to stay in the position, and every day you have to do something new, something that makes your boss believe that you deserve the position. So I think the private sector, it is risky. Not only the thing of innovation and go to something pure, but
That's a
private
great
sector
point. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I remember what I was going to say, which is that I still don't know enough to know kind of how this works, but I could imagine a major technology company or a group of them setting up incubators in different places that are maybe smaller economies, but definitely have huge potential. And it would seem like you could couple it with sort of a financing objective, so that you're shining the spotlight, say, on Cyprus and establishing an incubator and bringing venture capitalists over and holding conferences and generating a buzz about talking about the IP protection, talking about the tax rate, talking about all of the things that should make it appealing to do business here and to foster exciting new companies.
Let me also say, excuse me, also in our country there are a number of business angels network opportunities. So
That's
even
good
if-
to know.
Yes, it's so.
Cyber.
Yes, cyber and not only. So even if you don't have the funds to proceed with the registration and the protection of your IP rights, or even the commercialization of your IP
Mhm.
rights, you have the opportunity to meet these business angels networks,
Mhm.
and if they like your idea, they
Yes.
can
Yeah.
sponsor it. And
We were talking beforehand. What's that company called that made the 3D printer, MakerBot? And were you saying it was the product of a Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah.
Do you guys maybe it's too early to do it, but is that, that's, obviously it's international, right? So you don't need to physically be in a place. You can access it from any given.
Yeah.
Only accept projects from the United States and Canada.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It has some regional restrictions.
I see.
Maybe that could be included.
But that's like, yeah. But that's a business idea just waiting to be, not discovered, because it's about expand. There's no reason that there should be international restrictions on the ability to access capital for good ideas, right? I mean, it's easy to make international transfers of funds. You can transmit the information about the projects just as easily from California to Michigan as California to Cyprus. So that would see kind of the crowdsourcing model of finance.
Actually, there is
Is there?
two companies that we did crowdsourcing.
Say that again.
Even there is Cypriot that they did crowdsourcing. For example, Pavlos Kondini, who made a crowdsourcing to finance his after career for 25,000. There is other company, Cypriot owned in London, that they did crowdsourcing, like Liga La Vida. There is money. I disagree with Andreas. There is money. But
That's
there
good.
is-
That's good.
You have to
Know the
go
way.
somewhere and find it.
Right.
So I think the information, I think that the lack of information that people need is one of the big problems in Cyprus.
This is the need that we saw when we started with Rap Cyprus. There is this need of the ecosystem to have its own news portal that all this information will flow there, back and forth to the normal public and the normal, and changing actually with the ecosystem, with the whole ecosystem, to change this mentality. Because if you see statistics in Europe, you have 3 out of 10 people they want to start up a business or make their own. But in USA, where you come from in Asia, 7 to 10 people they want to start their own company. Statistics.
That high.
Statistics.
There's also a false belief in Cyprus that you need venture capital to start a private company, which is totally wrong, in my opinion, because everything starts from your room, your garage, your computer.
Right.
So there is also this false idea that you need money to start something, but if you start something from your own, you show to a venture capitalist that you've already done the serious work, you already done the first step, and you're committed to your product or your service, and then venture capitalists is coming and they invest their
Right.
idea, they invest in your idea.
What is the, I mean, that actually is a hugely important point, which is, you know, IPR is important, funding is important, but even really basic things like the ease of setting up a company is extraordinarily important, because you can have the best IPR regime in the world, but if it takes, you know, 9 months to get through all the red tape to set up a company, you know, the IPR could be worthless by that time if you don't have kind of the first mover advantage. My impression is that this is a relatively good environment for setting up a business, but I mean, that is to the extent that there are challenges in just the mundane parts of setting up a business. That to me should be as big of a focus as making sure there's a strong IPR regime.
Also, now there's a lot of open source programs going on,
Right.
which is amazing, and it's helping a lot of people to get involved with technology, either in software or
Yeah.
hardware.
Yeah.
So
Which in a way is the opposite of IPR, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
a company or a group of companies is making a decision that in the long run, we actually have more to gain by not enforcing IPR that we could have, and making this, you know, whatever software open to everybody because of the network effects that we think it's going to generate. So that's another way in which IPR can sort of go.
Can you give us an example how comment can gain that way?
Sure. It is actually an example that kind of ties into the earlier example that I gave about what's going on in China. So we have in our trade association, you know, all these technology companies, and they have all been very concerned about what's going on in China and the need for the Chinese government's announced need to have the intellectual property of the companies transferred to it, right? To have the source code for some of its software transferred to it. And a big theme of all of our discussions with our member companies is we got to stick together. We got to, you know, have a united voice against the Chinese and push back on basically these technology, you know, it's almost theft requirements. IBM is part of our group, and IBM is very much a part of this united voice. But at the same time, they have a program that they've actually had for about a year and a half. I can't remember what it's called. It's like Open Power or something, where, and I'm not sure exactly what the technology is, but it has to do with certain parts of microchips. Their view is that if they can use open source technology relating to microchips to expand China's ability to generate certain kinds of companies and certain kinds of technological activity, that will actually create more demand for IBM's sort of downstream businesses of services and other things that it does that is proprietary. So I think the analysis is similar in a lot of cases. I think it's kind of the idea behind Linux or other open source platforms that compete with some of the proprietary software companies, that you want to create a more open environment to bring in more participants, and then you've got a bigger market to sell the proprietary stuff to. That's kind of the next step of the product or service.
Do you think that with the oil exploration and natural gas exploration that is going on in Cyprus and the involvement of Noble, that perhaps more American companies may be involved here that may be interested in coming here and creating opportunities for the people here?